Willie Green said recently that Zion Williamson doesn't get a good whistle from the refs, but should he actually be getting more free throws? Diving into it reveals something really interesting about how Zion has played this year. I'm going to fill you in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go!
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Tuesday, and we've got a show for you, also a game day for the New Orleans Pelicans, but I want to dive into Zion Williamson versus the refs. I've got numbers behind things. I've watched a ton of film on this. We got a lot to talk about with this because I actually think this led me into a number of different areas that I wasn't expecting. This was actually like a really fun show to plan and prep for. So I'm excited to talk to you about all of that in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we are the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. And we got a show for you today. Some of you are going to be upset with me. Some of you are going to be very upset with me when I kind of share some of the numbers and the things behind this and get to a conclusion, which will be in the second segment. Well, it's even in the first segment of today's show. Actually, it's in the first. And of course, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans if you don't already. Tell a friend about the show, all of that great stuff here, because you don't get analysis like this anywhere else. So this comes from over the weekend, right? The Miami Heat and the New Orleans Pelicans fought. They fought because of a hard foul on Zion Williamson. There's also a picture from the game the other night in the loss to the Chicago Bulls where Zion's got like an elbow in his face, like hitting his face, forearm hitting his face, and there's no foul called. Willie Green said it after the game that Zion Williamson doesn't get a good whistle. Brandon Ingram even said after one of the games that, like Zion drives into the paint almost as much as anybody, not exactly true, and doesn't get the whistle when other people do. So let's look at this, right? And so here's what I'm going to be in this show. I'm going to be really objective, not be homerish in this. I think some of y'all want me to just to scream, the refs are bad, Zion should be going to the line more. It's as simple as that. It actually really isn't. And in this first segment, we're going to look at some of the stats behind it. I made an actual spreadsheet to kind of analyze a couple of things here. And then I watched basically like every one of his shot attempts and things like that this year. You can do that over at nba.com/stats. Today's show is going to be a little more free flowing. I have it generally planned out, but I think some of these are going to go long. Also, by the way, if you're listening just to the podcast side, we're kind of migrating like hosts. So it's a little like spotty if the show's publishing right away or not. Kind of bear with me on that. But on YouTube, everything's going to be fine. All right, let me pull up my spreadsheet here. I sound like a nerd. I am a nerd. So I sorted every player in the NBA that's kind of qualifying per Basketball Dash reference and sorted them by free throw attempts per game. So no Joel Embiid in this one, no Ja Morant, because they're not qualifying for that, kind of given the lack of games played, things like that. So of players who qualify for this, and it's all the big name players, Zion Williamson's tied for 10th in terms of free throws per game at 6.7. He's tied with Jason Tatum at 6.7 free throws attempted per game. Top 10, right? Like he's kind of in the mix of shooting a ton of free throws. Number 1 is Giannis at 11.1. 2 is Luka Doncic at 9.3. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 9. Trae Young, Damian Lillard, DeMar DeRozan, Paolo Banchero at 7.1. Devin Booker at 7, Anthony Davis at 6.8, Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson at tied for 10. 12 is Anthony Edwards, then Julius Randle, De'Aaron Fox, and Jalen Brunson. Let's look at the top 15 because I think that gives us kind of a good mix. There's guards, there's front court players. You have one true center in Anthony Davis. And when you kind of look at it in that context, look, he's at 6.7 per game. It's the top 10. Is there anything to complain that much about? Yes and no. Yes and no, right? The conclusion I can tell you right now from this is he should go to the line a little bit more, but probably not a ton more. So beyond just looking at free throws attempted, I said, let's look at drives. That's a stat that everyone points to when it comes to free throw attempts, right? If you're driving to the basket, you're going into traffic, you're going at people, get fouled, go to the line kind of thing. Drives, I will tell you right now, isn't there's no necessarily a correlation between drives and free throw attempts per game. Giannis, who draws the most free throw attempts per game, 15.7 drives per game. Luka Doncic, who's 9.3, so about 2 behind Giannis, drives more than him, 18.7 times. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander drives the most, 24 times per game. It's kind of by far the most out of anyone on this list. Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic. Jokic, by the way, is 21st. Jason Tatum, though, Anthony Davis, the 2 players ahead of Zion Williamson, don't even qualify in the top 50 people of drives per game, but it doesn't mean that they're not worthy of drawing free throws, right? You have things like post-ups. Nikola Jokic takes the most of those. Anthony Davis is second. There's things like that. There's isolation. There's different ways to look at it. So don't just look at the drives per game number and think, oh, well, since Zion has a lot, and he is at 16.4 drives per game, that's more than Devin Booker, actually, more than Paolo Banchero, more than DeMar DeRozan, more than Damian Lillard, more than Trae Young, right? All of those guys are ahead of him. Look, it's more than Giannis does, right? He even posts up more than Giannis does, too. So you get into that, and when you look at that, again, there's no direct correlation, causation, right, between drives and going to the line. However, his numbers kind of have him a little bit behind some of the peers here. We'll get into why in the second segment. It's actually something that he's doing some of the time too. So I want to get into that as well. So the numbers state that he should go to the line, I would say a little bit more. Just a little bit more, not a ton more. Again, this is me being objective, right? Even if you think he should go to the line more, being in the top 10 in terms of free throws per game, it's not like he's being completely shafted, right? The stats basically say that. That said, stats and the eye test need to go hand in hand on things. You can watch it and see. If you're in the arena, you can hear him getting slapped. You hear this when you're sitting in the lower bowl in particular, and you can hear contact. Now, some contact is allowable, but it's definitely clear that a dude who is very strong ends up on the ground a lot. There's some sort of contact going on when it comes to that. And again, some contact's allowable, some is not. So my conclusion from all of this, if you want the too long didn't listen part of the show essentially, is should we go into the line a little bit more? But this is also important, right? Even if that doesn't seem like a lot, it actually is, right? Part of this is about protecting the players. Again, Zion getting hit in the face. If you call fouls, they don't do that as much. Kind of as simple as that, right? But let's say he gets to Luka's level. Let's not put him first. Let's put him at second in terms of free throw attempts per game. So Luka Doncic is shooting 2.6 more than Zion Williamson. Okay. It's not a ton. Zion's shooting it under 70%. Let's call it 70%. That's 1.8 points per game more. That wouldn't have won the Pelicans the game against the Chicago Bulls, right? If he was kind of getting to that average. But this does, so you can kind of point to it and be it doesn't really matter. But that's not true, right? At all. There's a cascading effect on this. One, it's easy points for Zion. But it also means the Pelicans get in the bonus earlier, meaning others go to the line more. Herb can go to the line. Trae, BI can go to the line more, right? You're also putting more fouls on opponents, so it impacts their rotation. Maybe guys foul out. Maybe they need to sit guys, right? Making things easier for New Orleans. So when you look at it like that, this is actually a significant thing because it affects more than just Zion's pure points per game. But some of the reason he isn't getting to the line more is Zion and the team's own fault. And that's what I thought was so interesting about all of this. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? I love driving, so I absolutely am. Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capability to take your adventure to the next level. You've got the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone, Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store, all built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. There's also the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's going to change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Nissan Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Armada, or the Nissan Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about the team. We're looking at Zion today. We're going to look at this the whole show. This one's really interesting. I promise. Stick with me to the end on everything. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and on YouTube. Comment down below. What do you think about Zion and his play? Should the team be doing more to try and get him more fouls? Do the refs just suck? That's an okay thing to think as well. And become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. So I told you in this one in the beginning, I'm going to be objective in this. I was kind of expecting to do kind of like an easy show. Just come in and scream like, yeah, the refs suck is something I say often, right? And Zion should get to the line more. And people would love to hear that, right? That would feel very validating, I think. But looking at this, looking at the numbers, he should get to the line a little bit more, not a ton more. And then I watched everything, right? This is where the stats and the eye test need to go hand in hand. It's not one or the other. It's using them kind of in concert with each other. And if they're different, why are they different? That's always intriguing to look at with everything. And that's kind of the approach I take. I love the analytics. It can point you in right directions, but then you also need to watch to make sure that that kind of all adds up and it's not just numbers being funny. So the numbers say you should go to the line a little bit more, not a ton more, right? And when you kind of get into that, okay, so why shouldn't he be going to the line a ton more? Because it feels like he should be, right? And then you dive into it a little bit more. And I watched literally every one of his shot attempts that he's taken this season that's available over at nba.com/stats. There's a couple of things in this, right? Like Zion is kind of at fault for this and has a big role to play in why he's not getting to the line more. And you're probably expecting me to say it's simply because he isn't flopping or selling calls. And some of that is true. I will admit that, right? And Zion said as much, right? That he needs to do that a little bit more. He needs to sell the calls a little bit more. But there's more to it than that. Look at his shot profile. Attempts in the restricted area, 0 to 3 feet, are actually down this year compared to previous years for him. And attempts from 3 feet to 10 feet are up. Now, that's usually like in the paint is 3 to 10 feet is kind of what it's considered. But so those type of shots are okay. But you're seeing this happening, and the number of attempts there are higher because he's not able to get to the rim as much this year. Partially because of the way defenses are playing him. I think that's a big part of that, right? If you watch him play, he's employing more runners, floaters, like shot put style kind of shots. So you're not going to really get a lot of calls on those. The rim's walled off. He gets a little bit of contact and he just kind of puts up a shot, but there isn't actually a foul on that sort of play. You can have some contact, right? You're not going to get calls like that, especially as a big man. And those shots aren't good enough. He's not great at those, right? Because that's just not kind of part of his bag yet, kind of in his game. On shots that are between 3 and 10 feet, he's shooting 40.1%. Compare that to 71.4% in 0 to 3 feet, right? Like that number's not great. He's shooting 36.4% from 3 by comparison. That's a little bit lower, but it's worth an extra point. That gets into the kind of efficiency stuff. Not that he should be taking more threes. So he's not scoring particularly efficiently in 3 to 10 feet. And I think teams and even refs know this. So they're just not calling things there. And I truly don't think they really kind of should be necessarily. And I think this, again, has to do with how teams are defending him. They're just walling him off more than he has been in the past and going, okay, kind of like break through all of this. Part of this is also his handle isn't elite, right? Like he loses the ball a lot when he gets into traffic sometimes. That's just a thing that happens. So you often see him, and I saw this on a lot of the possessions. He drives, kind of loses possession of the ball, and then everyone's kind of going for it, and there's some contact for there, but because he doesn't have possession of the ball, they're not calling a foul as much. Whether it's fair or unfair, it's kind of what's happening here. And so I get it. So like, yes, he should be getting to the line a little bit more, but kind of the style of play is not there. The other thing is he hasn't been as good this year. Like he's getting into form. But his finishing this year and with some of the other things that he's been doing isn't as good as it has been in years past. Is that maybe just slight regression, lack of growth, or just the way teams are defending him? I think that's all up for debate. And that's what I found so interesting about looking at the data, then watching all of the film behind it. It's just not as good this year. Like you can see it, right? Like his finishing has felt just a touch off. And so he's trying to kind of do that further away from the rim, and it's just not working as much. So he's not actually getting as close as you would like. The drives are up, the drives are a high number, but here's the thing. Drives don't end at the rim. They can end with you pulling up and shooting a 3 to 10 foot shot. That's not a good shot. And because that's a jumper, that's not like you're fighting through contact. Now, is it fair in the context of guys like DeMar DeRozan, who gets kind of breathed on and goes to the line more than Zion? Zion's at 6.7. DeMar DeRozan, again, is 7.2. It's half a free throw per game. That's not nothing, right? So, sure, you can kind of make that argument, but okay, give Zion that half a free throw more, right? One more foul per game is what you're kind of looking at there, if that. You know, again, that impacts things like we talked about in the first segment, but I don't know if it truly changes anything like that much. It changes things. It's important. But it also goes to show you that drives aren't kind of like the be-all, end-all of evaluating this, right? If Shea is driving more than anyone else, shouldn't he be number one then? You know, he's playing basically the same amount of minutes as Giannis, right? You know, should a guy like Jalen Brunson, who drives more than Zion Williamson does, should he be going to the line more than Zion? He's not. He's behind Zion by 0.3 free throw attempts per game, right? Like, look past that drives per game number at the other things. And when you kind of look at isolation here, and we'll talk more about this in the next segment, that's an area where Zion can really shine. That can also incorporate drives and other things too. So when you look at it, Zion's just not playing as well. And if he's not playing as well and is taking bad shots because of the way defenses are defending him, let's say, and, you know, they're not respecting opponent's shooter or the other Pelican shooters and things like that, right? Like Herb is a great example. He's in the top 20 in terms of 3-point percentage, and teams aren't covering him and they're leaving him wide open. It says something there, right? And I think you're seeing that kind of have an effect on Zion Williamson and how teams are defending him. And the Pelicans and Zion need to kind of help themselves out with this a little bit more, right? Even if Zion goes to the line 2.6 more times per game, get him to Luka level at number 2, right? That's 1 foul, 2 fouls. It's not a ton of missed calls there. And look, you can then kind of maybe point to all of this list and the data that I compiled, and I looked at drives, post-ups, right? Shooting foul frequency, isolation frequency. I looked at like everything. And there's one stat I'll tell you that I found really interesting here. And that's going to be for the next segment about like what the Pelicans can do to kind of help Zion with all this, because there are things that they can do. I think when you look at all of this stuff, you could say everyone should go to the line more. Everybody should go to the line more. Okay, yeah, but that's just not the reality of the NBA and how they're going to do it. They're just simply not going to call a shooting foul or a foul on every possession, even if there is actual contact. Like, we wouldn't want to watch that game, right? We hated that when James Harden did it. We wouldn't enjoy this. They'd win, and I'd be fine with them winning. That wouldn't be like an aesthetically pleasing style of basketball at all. So yeah, Zion should go to the line a little bit more. I don't think it's a ton more though. And that's where I'm being truly objective with this, right? You want me to come in and be like, he should lead the league in free throw attempts. Nah, like watching him play, like that doesn't check out. Like that just doesn't check out. The numbers don't make that check out either. But there are things the Pelicans can do more of. And let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. Look, sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. So it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. I honestly thought the fight with the Miami Heat was pretty awesome. I was at happy hour earlier having a drink with a couple friends of mine. They're like, oh, we saw the fight. And I was like, yeah, it was really cool. That probably says something about me, right? that probably says something about me. So if you need to get things off your chest, or maybe I was just a little annoyed and angry, maybe with the Miami Heat, it's good to talk about that sort of stuff, right? Like that's a really important thing. So therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. Let me take that. There we go. Okay, and thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team. Shooting you straight, right? Like that's the way, what I always say I want to do on the show. I want to shoot you straight here with what's going on around the team, good or bad. I'm not just going to kind of like play down and be like, yeah, Zion needs to get to the line more. People get excited and kind of eat that up. But that's not the truth of the matter here, I think, for things. So like I'm looking at this and I think you should get to the line a little bit more, not a ton. And the Pelicans and Zion aren't doing themselves any favors with this. So we're going to talk about that in this part of the show. So of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tell a friend about the show. Comment down below on YouTube. What do you think? Do I make a compelling case, or is it you're watching the games, you know he needs to go to the line more? Could be as simple as that. Like there's nothing wrong with thinking that necessarily. But I want to kind of shed some light on things that I found really interesting here. And I thought Zion just not being as good, even though he's trending in the right direction, I do think that has something to do with it as well. So that said, what can we do here? How can we get him more attempts from the free throw line? First and foremost, look, dude's got to shoot above 70% if he wants to get to the line more, right? Like you're starting to kind of lose efficiency there. Like going to the line here is giving him, I guess that's 1.4 points per trip to the line, kind of. That's on 2 shots. That's not amazing. It's not bad. It's not really good either. You want that to be closer to 2 per 2 trips. And he's not doing that right now. So that's a slight concern there, that if he gets to the line, is this actually like the best way we can do it? I mean, yes, because of the cascading effect that we talked about, right? Like that's an important thing. So as we stated in the first part of the show, that would be a big advantage. So what can they do more? So one of the things that I think it's worth noting, and Zion talked about this earlier in the year, right? Like he's kind of playing a new role for this team. They've talked about trying to go to point Zion and all that, but they haven't done that really for like a full game or anything like that. Against the Chicago Bulls, I was like, what was the bad loss? You know, BI handled the ball a lot. You know, you didn't have CJ, so it was really going to be on Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson to do it, but BI handled the ball a lot. And so you saw a lot of kind of like weird usage of Zion Williamson, right? And this is not a Zion Williamson versus Brandon Ingram debate. And I've talked with some of y'all on Twitter about this, right? The way I look at this is one of them can be more of a complementary player than the other. Look, Zion can't right now. At least not now, maybe not ever, right? And we can say that's an indictment on him. But if you're trying to kind of maximize your team this season, right now, it means kind of changing BI's role, having him work more off ball, right? Now, I don't think that's the best use of him as a player. He struggled with that in Team USA this summer, but he can do more of that than Zion Williamson can. So if you're looking at kind of like positioning your best players and designing roles that's going to maximize like the most of what you have right now, it's give Zion the ball and let Brandon Ingram then kind of work off of him, right? I like that BI took 6 threes, even though he only made 2 of them, right? 33%. It's not an amazing number, but I like that he was willing to take those threes to keep kind of teams honest. And you don't see that enough, right? That's why I want to see Zion with more shooters. One of the reasons for that is when you get Zion in isolation, then that entire list, and I have the top 25 people, right? And I didn't even put the numbers for everyone in my fancy spreadsheet here because didn't need to. Looking at Giannis, Luka, Shea, Trey, Lillard, DeRozan, Banchero, Booker, Davis, Tatum, Edwards, Randall, Fox, Brunson, even Kevin Durant, Bam Adebayo, Donovan Mitchell, right? When you look at them in isolation, and do they draw shooting fouls in isolation, Zion torches all of them, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Let me see if I can find it. In isolation by getting to the line more than any of them do. Zion in isolation is, frankly, fantastic in terms of getting to the line and scoring or getting an and one. It's a really good number of him drawing free throws, basically, with guys who do significant amounts of isolation. That's a really impressive thing, right? Like, he draws shooting fouls in isolation more than James Harden, Tatum, Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He does it more than Shai by about 4% of the time. More than Kyrie Irving, more than Joel Embiid, right? Like, we look at these numbers and they're pretty incredible for what he's doing, right? Like, Jimmy Butler, in terms of the top 50, is one of the guys that does it more than him, and that's really about it. He basically beats everybody else with that. So does that mean more Zion in isolation and less of him kind of off ball? Like, maybe, right? Put shooters around him, give him a little bit of space to work or outlets to pass to if they take it away, and he's either going to draw the foul, score at the rim, or kick it out to somebody. And they hopefully make a three. That's a way to do this. Now, where does BI fit in that? It's a valid question. But I think that's a way that you can get him to the line more. You know, his usage is weird this year, right? The usage with him on the court with Brandon Ingram is lower than what it is with just him out there by himself. So you can't just look at the usage number and go like, oh, okay, there we go. That's what it is. It's weird to try and kind of parse through and figure everything out and look at him with his usage rate with all of that, right? You know, we see him just kind of standing around doing nothing for possessions. That's not going to get him to the line more. You need to get the ball in his hands to do that and let him attack, right? Otherwise, that's not going to happen. So trying to kind of figure that out has been, I think, difficult for some of these, for this team. And they haven't been doing a very good job of that. And I do think that is on coaching and kind of building that hierarchy out of everything. The other thing is other guys should attack too, right? Brandon Ingram has done is scoring at the rim incredibly well. In that first half against the Chicago Bulls, right? He was awesome shooting threes or driving to the basket and trying to score, and he was scoring at a very high rate. When you look at his numbers in terms of field goal percentage, he's scoring at the rim higher than Zion is this season. 73.4%. That's an incredible number. But the percentage of those shots is still really low. It's under 15% of his kind of shot diet, right? Like, since he's been here in New Orleans, it's never been above 14.6%. In LA, you know, he did it, or in the year he won Most Improved Player, it was 25%. So it's about 10% more, right? That number's just kind of gone down. He's got to be more aggressive, because he can do it really well. He just sometimes, I think, gets a little too comfortable with certain types of shots and instead push forward more. Part of that has to do with spacing too. And it's why you're seeing his assist numbers be high, because he's willing to pass out of that, which I think is a great thing if it's not there, right? This is why he's averaging tying a career high in assists of 5.8 per game. He's making the smart read, the smart play. Same thing with Zion Williamson too. But if they can get into the bonus earlier, look, I think that has an effect on the refs. If the team's in the bonus early and then Zion drives and attacks, I think they're more likely to call a foul. Look, the refs are going to be thinking, well, the opponent has been fouling a lot, otherwise they wouldn't be in the bonus. So clearly, if they're driving, we're going to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the Pelicans there. Too many times we see them get into the bonus and then just abandon attacking and being aggressive. By being aggressive, by kind of having that foot on the gas like that, they're going to get to the line more. That's going to get Zion the more free throws that everyone thinks he should get. It's all a team thing and a Zion thing too. This all works really well, not really well together, but it's all kind of part of the same thing, right? Like, offense and defense exist kind of, in my opinion, as one. So when you look at it from that sense, try maximizing everything. And that's something that the Pelicans are not doing whatsoever, it feels like. That's why it feels like they're being held back. That's why we've been kind of down on the team in a sense, even though they're winning and a good team. But the West is tough, and you need to be kind of like playing your best basketball right now, and the team isn't, and they could be doing more to get some of these easy points. The team's in the play-in tournament right now. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Too stat heavy, not enough eye test? Let me know what you think. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll be back probably live tonight after the New York Knicks game. We'll recap that live on the show. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you as always for listening. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is Locked On Pelicans, and I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with you all tomorrow.